Thanks so much. I hope my internet connection is strong. It was a little sketchy earlier, but I apologize if I cut out. This It's so great that David agreed to do this. I have to organize these events for a book tour, and I have a lot of writer friends, and only one writer friend volunteered before I could put the screws to him, and that was David. So thank you so much for that.
It seems a little desperate, but
No, I think maybe you thought you owed me, but you really don't. And I got his new book in the mail, so I'm so thrilled to read it. So David's going to read from sort of late in the novel, but it's one of my favorite chapters and one of my favorite characters, a character named Del Dalvo. So I'm going to set up the story a little bit so that when David drops you in the middle of it, you'll know where you are. The Cold Millions is the story of Rye and Gig Dolan, two young hobos in the early 1900s who get swept up in the bloody free speech riots in Spokane, Washington, my hometown, and by the charismatic, real-life labor activist Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. The novel features a host of other characters whose voices come in and out onto the page as they tell their stories, like this chapter featuring Del Dalvo. Del is a retired Pinkerton detective hired by a rich timber and mining baron named Lem Brand to hinder Elizabeth Gurley Flynn as she goes around the West raising money and awareness about the unfair labor practices in Spokane. But his plan has gone badly, and when we in this scene, in the part David's going to read, he's in a terrible mood. He's sitting across from the train station waiting for Elizabeth Gurley Flynn to return by train from a fundraising trip to Montana. She's with young Rye Dolan and Rye's anarchist friend, Early Reston. And most alarming, Del has just found out that Reston might also be a former Pinkerton detective hired by Brand like he was to infiltrate the Union. And he's sitting in this bar when watching them get off the train when who should walk out but Early Reston.
I love this passage too because it's narrating a character's death from the inside, and I've never, if I've read it before, I don't remember, and I was just so struck by it when I did read it by its, I'm assuming verisimilitude because I've never died, but. I'll get through this then. Del Dalvo, he said, like we met before. It is the strangest aspect of aging, how faces blur, a language you no longer speak. Up close, this man seemed familiar, but perhaps the way a common face is reminiscent of others, thin, weary, plain. An age that might be 25 or 45, so ordinary in appearance that only another agency man would appreciate the difficulty of achieving such anonymity. Like walking in snow without making a footprint. You have me at a disadvantage, I said, my hand finding my 32. Oh, I doubt that, he said. Has any man ever had the great Del Dalvo at a disadvantage? He took the chair next to mine. Brand hired you, he asked. Indeed, I said, my hand square on the savage grip. And you? Yep, a month ago, he said. Wanted me to work both sides, rile things up, get the Union throwing bombs and the cops busting heads. He wanted to avoid what happened in Missoula, the cops and mayor going soft. Well, no one's gone soft, I said. You hire me to rile, I rile. He looked away, maybe too much. You think that's why my employer didn't tell me about you? He didn't? No, I thought you were just one of them bums. Really? He didn't tell you? I shrugged. Would have been good information to have. For me, too. I'm sure. A snake, isn't he? Did he do the driver bit with you? I laughed. And the dossiers? Jesus, he said. So what office are you out of? Office? This confused me. I thought you were Pink. Are you freelance? He chuckled like there was a funny story in that and shifted in his chair and looked around for a waiter. I'm going to have a drink. You want one? Out the window, I could no longer see Gurley or Ryan Dolan. I craned my neck. I'd find them later. It's lunch. They won't open the whiskey, I said. Of course they will. Reston spun toward the passing waiter. Excuse me. But the man skated by without stopping, and when Reston turned back, it was with a lunge, the blade sliding between ribs and nearly lifting me off my chair. I felt more pressure than pain, a thrust-lift swipe in my chest and lung, the man's full weight, not jerking, but easy and practiced, like a butcher cutting rib roasts, and what felt like 8 inches of steel in my side, and God, I was dead on my chair. My hand came off the handle of the 32. I scrabbled for it, but it was gone. Reston was leaning on the knife. There's the pain. I yelled, coughed, and sputtered, but he was standing, bent over me as if concerned about my condition. He spoke with, was that an attempt at an English accent? Oh, Dell, what's the bother? Left hand on the handle of the knife, right reaching around his backside to tuck my gun into the back of his pants. Can a man admire his killer's method? Except for the shite accent. Oh my, you're coughing blood, Dell. And he called out to the bar, stay back. He put that right arm around me, helped me to my feet. My brother is consumptive. He said I need to get him some air. The waiter gave us a wide berth, as Reston must have known he would, and he had me upright, pulling me out the door. The waiter held it for us. Reston's right arm over my shoulder, holding me up, his left reaching across his own body into my suit coat, onto the hidden handle of his knife, which jutted from my side and which he used like the tiller of a boat to steer me. I got out a weak help to the waiter, but Reston said, I'm trying, Dell, I'm trying to help, and he gave the knife a slight twist. The pain buckled my knees, and I cried out again. My brother is quite ill, he said, as he lurched me down the block, over the curb and into the street. Consumption, stay back, he repeated, knowing TB could explain the blood and that people would steer away from a man coughing it up. He was so convincing that I almost wished he were my brother, taking care of me. Oh, Dell, dead Dell, God, Dell. And I cried out again. Quiet now, he whispered. Won't be long. I faked a stagger, mustered some last fight, and gave him a sharp elbow, and followed that with a fist, and was almost able to spin away from him. But that knife was heavy in my side, and he gave another turn to the handle, and oh, goddamn weeping sorrow, goddamn pain. I could do nothing but collapse against my brother and surrender to it. None of that, he said. Fucking Brand, I muttered, for that was my true killer, luring me to this hell city and hiring me to kill my brother. And God, I wanted my brother to go and kill Brand next. God, weeping sorrow. Quiet now, he said. Tell me, are you a religious man, Dell? No, I managed. That's good, he said, because I don't believe we have time for rituals. Oh, God, weeping pain. I'm sorry, I know it hurts, he said. Try not to talk or breathe too deeply. We're almost there. Stay quiet, and I'll help you along. Oh, weeping God. You shouldn't have drunk so much, Dell, he called out to someone who must have been seen us staggering, and him half carrying me, for he was having trouble supporting my weight now. I wished I could stop weeping. Was this how it had felt for the people I'd planted? Jesus, the horror. At least I was quick, and the shame of it. I could have gone to see my grandson and daughter in Lexington. Oh, that little girl running into my arms. Shame, weep, shame, goddamn Spokane morbs. Sorry for it all. Sorriest for me. Shame, weep. God, panic, weep, shame, weep. We walked east and then turned north. He had me step over railroad tracks. We were moving toward the river. He laid me down in some wild grass, and the pain nearly undid me. I opened my eyes. We were in a little grassy strip between railroad sidings, just above the south channel of the river. He was crouched, a little winded from carrying me so far. Exhale, he said. And when I did, he pulled the knife from my side, and I felt blinding pain and then a loosening and a relief, that blade and handle out of me. But the burbling of blood in my breath was enough to know I would drown one way or another. He took my hand and pressed it against the wound. Hold your hand here, take shallow breaths. It's okay now. I will put you out quickly once you answer some questions. I opened my eyes. He was standing above me, wiping clean the blade, which was smaller than I'd have thought, long and narrow, barely wider than an ice pick. The sky was low and gray behind him. What are you going to do? Me? Finish the job I was hired for and go collect my money. I didn't know. Wince, weep, shame. He said you were a dangerous bum, said you punched a cop. Oh, I did more than that, he said. It hit me then. The cop who was shot? He said again, you hire me to rile. I rile. It became clear then, Brand hires Reston, but he kills a cop. So Brand hires me to fix that problem. I pictured his consortium. If anyone found out he hired you, I didn't finish the sentence. Hey, look at there. A smile crept over Reston's face. The great Del Dalvo has solved his last crime. Weeping sorrow. I'm sorry, Del, he said, and started to come at me again. The kid, I said. Brand got to him too? This stopped him. What? The kid, Dolan. I met with him in Seattle. He's the one who told me you were going to Wallace. Brand bought him for $20. The look on his face. Ryan? Yeah. I hoped he'd kill the kid. Hoped he'd finish the whole lot. The bums, Gurley, Flynn, Brand. I imagine him going door to door, killing the whole city, marching those millionaires into that big fireplace, all that pig fat wealth crackling and melting, him killing every booster and setting fire to that bloated theater stage. I imagine the whole city gone. And it was a great feeling, picturing Reston wiping the Morb town from the planet. He was like no Pinkerton I'd ever known, those priggish bookkeepers, and I felt a terrible respect for whatever he was. You're not, even to my own ears, my burbling words made no sense. I need to. I stared at the sky. Old prayers. Okay, quiet now, he said. He bent over me and blocked the sky. Looked in my eyes, such warm eyes, you'd never know. And then I felt one of his hands open my coat. He reached for my wallet, but I got the strength to push his hand away. Terrible form while a man still breathed. Would he go for my fillings next? Sorry, Del, he said. You're right. Oh, blessed weeping shame. Wait, I said, wait. Oh, cold morbs. And he bent again and covered my eyes, and I tried again. Oof. But he drew the blade across my throat, and the warmth spread, and my arms went out in wide embrace, and that's when...
That is when.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was so pleased when you said you wanted to read that section, because you said you'd never seen that, and that was the reason I did it.
Oh, really?
As I was writing this book, I was thinking I'd never written something this historical, and I thought all these characters are gone. They're all ghosts. And it made me think about the sort of intimacy of writing about people who are dead, and so kind of writing it with that intimacy was sort of a challenge to give myself, even a scoundrel like Del.
Well, and then you do it again. You must have enjoyed it because you do it with Sullivan later in the book, right?
Yeah, it seemed like it started to feel like this again. You know, that if I was going to kill a character, I didn't want the violence to be off stage. I wanted to see it, you know. And the book is framed by two real killings that happened in my city in 1909. And again, I don't know, I felt this a combination of the writing challenge and you know, just to hear that, just to imagine what that would feel like, and to hear you read it was so great. I have to say, it was it's really, it reminds me of the first time I had a table reading, to hear my words read.
The bad English accent snuck up on me, but I said, "Oh, I can do a bad one." Yeah.
I wrote it as a bad English accent, so you wouldn't feel bad.
So those two murders of Del and of Sullivan, those are the actual murders.
Well, Waterbury, the very beginning, it's a sort of prologue book, which is the thing that Early's talking about. Yeah, there's quite a bit of the novel that was real, that was sort of the foundation for me. It was almost like these tent poles that were the real story, and I wanted to build the fiction around them. But
I wanted to ask you a question about research. From my own process, because I find that research is endlessly inspiring, and yet it can also weigh you down in a way, so that there's a point at which I will do a certain amount of research, and then I've got to just start writing, and then I will research later after I've written some bullshit that I've got to correct. And I don't know how you go about doing it.
It sounds like you were looking over my shoulder the whole. That is exactly, you know, and that first research is so freeing. It's so thrilling. And then I almost feel like there's a second level of research for me that is, how much does a suit cost in 1909? How would this person have gotten there? That's kind of logistical. And the great thing about the difference between fiction and nonfiction, which I've also written, is with fiction, you're not necessarily writing what was, but what could have been. And so then there's a level of just desperately trying to match your research to what you've imagined, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
at least then
But
it's like cherry picking evidence, like when the government cherry picks evidence. At a certain
yeah,
point, you've gone enough and written enough, so you know exactly what you want to cherry pick from history, and you can actually, with Google now or with a good research,
yeah,
you can actually find the things that make your story true in a way,
yeah.
or truer.
I think the kind of research that I love the most, though, is when I don't know what I'm looking for. When I'm just looking at old newspaper clippings, and when I come across the fact that they used to dynamite the river to blow all the debris downstream, and that they would solve murders that way, the
Oh, right.
bodies that float.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you discover something like that, it just is this kind of gift. But I loved what you said about. I keep joking that at some point I have to fire the whole research department and just rely on the fiction department. And,
there is this sense in which, I mean, I forget what writer had said, but but like that a book can only withstand so many facts before it sinks. And
yeah,
I don't know that I agree with it, but it's certainly something to consider when you're writing, because I love throwing in facts that I didn't know from the research that I could have made up, because that's how much I'm responding to them.
Are you drawn to the places that you live and the times you lived? I mean, I know you've written lovingly New York. Yeah. Have you and I think that. So I wrote an entire novel about Italy after spending 10 days there.
Oh, really?
And so to write about Spokane in many ways was really freeing, because there's it's this part of you don't have to wonder about. You have that anchor. Does place work like that for you?
Sure. I mean, in the new novel, I knew I wanted to write about Mormons, so I was like, oh my God, I've got to go to Utah and spend like months in Utah. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. So then I did a little research, and I found nothing against Utah, but it just didn't fit. And I found that there was a huge Mormon concentration in San Bernardino. And I was like, oh, I get to write about LA. I know LA, and I can write about LA. So that's how that happened. But what I love about that passage, and what I want to say before you read your passage, is you have this incredible ability to empathize with all your characters. And these are not, Dell is not a character that your Jess's heart, I know, and doesn't go out to, in terms of like, he's on the wrong side. He's the cops, he's the bad cops, whatever. And yet the way you're able to write his humanity and his concerns without judgment, without authorial judgment. And I find it heartbreaking in that sense, with Sullivan too. And I really want to commend you, not just in writing a death scene from the inside, which I feel is pretty ballsy, but also for your empathy for all the characters in this book. That's what struck me, is across along the whole gamut of your characters, male, female, old, young, whatever, in this book, good guys, bad guys, they're all explained with their humanity and their rationalizations and their sense that they're good guys, and that's really that's a real mature writing, and it's really full writing. And I just want to point it out, because it's not easy, and it's not a given, especially in today's kind of politicized climate.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was one of the unexpected gifts of going inside some of these other voices too. It's the great thing about fiction, that interiority. You find your way in, and so a voice like Dell's, I think it began for me with language, and I loved hearing you read some of that. And he refers to the morbs over.
Yes, I wanted to ask you what that is, because I don't know what that is.
So I started envisioning. So Dell is one of the villains in the novel, but I also saw him as much more than that. This book takes place between all of these different periods. There are cars on the road at the same time. There are horses. It's kind of the end of the West and the beginning of this other period. But I also saw it fiction-wise as the sort of missing link between the Western and the noir. And so I started thinking about noir and where does that language come from? And pretty soon I was reading 19th century British mysteries, and coming across all of this incredible language like Dollymop,
Dollymop. Yeah.
Mop and Lobcocked and the Morbs. And the Morbs, anyone who's lived through the last 4 years know what the Morbs is. It's a sense of terrible unease, a sense of something morbid about to happen.
Oh, the Morbs.
Yeah, I gave me the Morbs. And so
yeah.
A lot of times with these sections that I would write, so most of the novel takes place in third person following Gig and Rye. But then I was able to go in sort of these other characters and bring them in. And the image I had was the main thrust of the novel is like the Spokane River. It's like this river. And I brought in these undercurrents or tributaries. And the language they would sort of announce themselves. And so Dell saying, first words out of his mouth are Spokane gave me the Morbs.
Yeah.
And I knew then, oh, he's going to die.
Right.
I just had this sense that Dell wasn't long for the world. And so, yeah, that language, I think, was kind of the first way. And then if you imagine a character at the end of things, his regrets, there's a real slight moment. Sometimes you put something in, you don't even know if it'll register, but he thinks about his grandson. He says he's 6 or 9,
Yeah.
He's got, and just a line like that will kind of break my heart to think, he's got it pegged somewhere in 3 years,
Yeah. Let me ask you, well, a couple of questions. Do you mind are you itching to read your bit?
No. I was going to show a little. I think technically it's not going to work, so we'll just chat.
Language and character. Does one determine the other? Does one come before the other? Did you feel the language of this time, which is it's so important in the book, and it's so wonderfully rendered. I mean, out there when you read this book, he has complete command of the idiom of that time. I assume, I don't know it, but it felt real and inhabited and lived in. So did that, once you had words like Dollymop and Lobcocked and more, did that start to make characters visible to you, or did you start with the characters and then go to the language?
It's different with different books. I often will have a sort of image, and then I have to figure out who are those people. With Beautiful Ruins, I saw this woman coming into this cove in the very beginning, and I had to figure out who that was. So I felt like that came in incident and character. With this one, it was definitely language.
Yeah.
I wrote in my journal the word Bindlestiff years ago, like 10 years ago. And I just wanted to write a novel with the word Bindlestiff in it.
Well, congratulations.
I did it. Cross that off the list.
Well, I guess it's like an oyster with a grain of sand, right? The Bindlestiff was there, and here's the pearl. And
and this world of hobos, tramps, and bums, and Gig has a handy sort of lexicology about which is which. That a bum wanders and drinks, a tramp wanders and dreams, and a hobo wanders and works. And that world I fell for it. I was reading, I was walking around singing wobbly songs, but then to translate that language and to hopefully make it resonant, and to be able to show the class warfare and the social unrest and have it connect with readers now. You have, it's similar to research. You sort of embed yourself in it so that you know it so well that you can leave some of it behind, which is the tricky thing.
Yeah. And in terms of character, do you reach a point in the writing of it? I don't know how much you plan out. I don't know what kind of an outline you have. I don't know anything about your process. Um, do you ever get to a point, or do you hope to get to a point? Do you leave enough open ended so that when you get to a point where the characters start to dictate to you rather than you dictating to them? And were you surprised at any point in this novel? And what were those surprises to you?
Oh man, that's such a great question. I do outline about a week before I'm done. Just um, but the rest of the time I'm just sort of flying. And I have this crazy thought, I have this idea that if I don't know what's going to happen, the reader will be surprised also.
I think
Um,
that's true. I
and
think.
that feel fresh, and that's sort of how life works. I have a general sense where this one was so contained by the actual free speech riots of 1909, Spokane, Washington, by a real character like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, that I have those sort of constraints. But within that, I love not knowing where I'm going, and the things that surprised me, the things I didn't know. I probably changed this book at the end more than anything I've ever written. I took out, I rearranged chapters in the beginning. I added things. I changed things about main characters. Even after the ARE, my wife had made this suggestion. I'm like, that's brilliant. And so even then, if I may change it by the paperback. So I
Right.
was making these little adjustments and changes, but they're pretty small. Once the story had sort of landed, they were pretty small. But yeah, there were versions that in which all sorts of different things happened.
Right.
When it's funny, the longest the novel has taken me is Beautiful Ruins, which took me 15 years
Really.
of that same process of sort of stumbling around, stumbling back, and then going back when I've got a completed draft and making it look as if this is the most elegantly constructed thing ever. And the hard thing about that is you don't know when you'll be ready for that part of the process.
Right.
But yeah, with this book, it was I finally had to outline to see where are those undercurrent chapters coming in. Do we have enough third person pushing it forward? One of the characters, Gig, is a bit of an autodidact, a self-taught person like I am, and so he's reading War and Peace, and I had this this sort of vanity that I would structure the novel just like War and Peace. So I knew there would be 4 sections and an epilogue, and that was about as much structure as I knew
Right.
that it would.
Um, I think also that you touch on the equivalencies between what's going on now and then, and I would think that clearly this was written long before last summer, which would be the most obvious parallel. But I wonder again at your process of nobody's playing connect the dots, and you certainly aren't, and you don't want to. But once that started to happen, did you then go back and look at it again? Did you change anything? Did you?
No.
No.
I mean, the initial impulse was to write about something very timely and political, which is income inequality, and to write about it from both of my grandfathers were indigent workers. My dad was a lifelong labor man, worked in an aluminum plant. And so I wanted to write an early labor kind of parable, or, and I also want to write this big rousing Western. And I knew I was writing about social unrest at a time of social unrest, and not just the Black Lives Matter protests, which were wildly inspiring in the same way, but also young people walking schools for climate change, and the young people protesting the shootings at Parkland. And my protagonists in this novel are 16, 23,
Yes.
and 19.
Right.
And it's sort of hard to write about young people that way, but I wanted them to have that sort of innocence and that idealism that I kept seeing in my kids and in all these young people. So yeah, it was. But then watching as protests erupted, in a way, there are parallels, but race and racism in America is a singular story. It's
Right.
The parallels fall away in comparison to something as vast and large as that. There are riots in the streets. There are. My friend Karen Russell, the writer, said she was reading the book one day when a tear gas canister rolled down the street in her city in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could miss the parallels, but to me they were more thematic in the beginning.
Right.
And I tried to just let them exist organically, not to push them. Hopefully.
Yeah, I don't think that you did, and you and these two brothers, it felt very almost Greek to me, or biblical.
Yeah.
These brothers, the story that you had, you did have this meticulously researched parable or world or early world. It's almost like it's not Eden, but it's that long ago, and you had these two boys, these two brothers, and you told this tragic, in the Greek sense or biblical sense, story about these two young men. And I think that the innocence of the language, or the innocence of the psychology, because you give yourself brilliantly, you give yourself a structure. There's no modern narration in this. There's no psychoanalyzing. It's interior, and you get it from the thought processes, but they don't have access to post-Freudian language and introspection and all that. So there is an innocence to it, and a lack of self-consciousness, but a consciousness. And that's why it pushed me back in terms of my the impact that it had on me was more direct, because the characters aren't in my way interpreting themselves for me. They're really just living in the Greek way or in the biblical way, where they're undergoing huge earth-shaking events and reacting. And I really, I feel it's very powerful. And I wonder if you kind of went back and forth in terms of how much introspection, the language of introspection, again, language, and that kind of thing.
I mean, there were a few times when I was writing and I would be reminded, oh, Rye is 17.
Right.
Would he have access to this? And the innocence was valuable in a way to allow him. The industrial workers of the world are essentially pushing a really heavy socialism, communism. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn ended up as she founded the ACLU and ended up as the chairwoman of the Communist Party. And of course, knowing how communism turns out in, say, Soviet Russia, you can't really have that level of innocence. And so thinking about that in sort of macro way and approaching the characters that way, that they are all ideal in action. Everything, especially Rye, everything that happens to him pushes him to the next thing. And so the introspection that he has then is, because he's so young, is I think he's able to register that thing I talked about, income inequality, on a really basic level. I'm sitting in the library of the wealthiest person I'll ever know, and my brother, who loves books, will never see this floor-to-ceiling library and get to feel the heat coming up from a radiated floor. Yeah. And so it was almost just, staying on that level, staying on the level of what these characters are experiencing, and then allowing, and I think that's a way almost of accessing yourself as a young person. You're not jaded, you're not cynical. And it was, I think, one of my big fears in this book is that it was earnest and idealistic. And
no, to me that's one of the great merits, is that
yeah,
you know, you're able to, and I think because of the style and the language and the time, you're able to truthfully come across the innocence of it, because it's that time, you know, that there aren't any sex scenes, you know, really. There's some burlesque, yeah, but it's, you know, it's fun, you know, that way. It's fun and innocent. And you know, you have this amazing, beautiful scene the second half of the book where where Rye buys a suit for himself, and you have this, you know, you have this budding communist, I guess, you know, this budding socialist, this kid, and it's just this beautiful scene where he's like, I want to look good in a suit, you know, I want that I want to be the guy that wears that suit, you know. And it's heartbreaking because he's 17 and he wants to dress nice, he wants a nice suit. Yeah, any 17-year-old gets that first suit. And I just found that scene to be just brilliant, just brilliant.
You asked about things you didn't know and surprises, and realizing Rye was a clothes horse, you know, which weird I am a little bit, which you would not ever know from the clothes I own. But
no, I didn't know that.
No, and I'm not really, but one of my nephews used to call me Uncle Metro, and giving him that little, you know, giving a homeless orphaned kid an appreciation for a nice pair of gloves and a suit, and those sort of character moments, you know, I don't write autobiographically, but I write really personally, and that, you know, connecting with a character that way. And I wonder for you if you find those character surprises to be, I don't know, I find them to be one of the great thrills.
Yeah, no, and I was thrilled when I read it, and I think this is a quote that's attributed to Neil Simon when somebody asked him, you know, what's autobiographical of the Brighton, you know, the Brighton trilogy or whatever, and he said it's all autobiographical, even the stuff you make up. And I think that's what you're saying is, like, you know, it's infused by your personal. You're not even aware of it until it comes out in this character. And I'm sure you weren't planning on writing about Uncle Metro, you know, but then you know, then it came out in that moment. And yes, that's always surprising to me as well. And I think there's something liberating when you are writing through another character that allows you to look at yourself or these other parts of yourself with less judgment, and you can kind of get it out on the paper with this kind of freedom and love, really. And I think that's what I was trying to get to earlier. Yeah, and when I said you had empathy, you know, you had love for all your characters, and that's why I want to ask one other question on if you don't mind, because you know, being I was in graduate school, you know, and I studied Milton and Blake said of Milton that he was of the devil's party without knowing it, famously, because Lucifer is the most exciting character in Paradise Lost, and he puts Adam to shame, and clearly it's the star-making role of that book is Lucifer. And I felt like early Reston kind of, he really tried to take over this novel from you, and he's the guy that you clearly dislike the most, if you were to dislike anyone, and you don't, but he's the guy, he's the bad guy, he's an anarchist, he's a nihilist, and yet I could feel your kind of excitement writing him, and I could also feel, you know, the book kind of like getting like this when, and I was like, oh, what a great character, and yet he's trying to break out of this book and make it his own.
Yeah, that's such a perceptive thing. I think of your other teacher, Harold Bloom, and his
Yeah,
love for, and those big characters. I mean, you read Henry IV, 1 and 2, and you just want Falstaff. You know,
yeah, right,
you don't even want the plot of the play to move along. You
right,
want to spend time with big characters who are reprobates, who are, and it's almost as if whatever characters of humanity you're writing about are so present on the surface of those kinds of characters. They're so accessible, and you're writing about conflict. You're writing about conflict within a character, without. They do sort of take over. When I was writing Beautiful Ruins, I remember thinking, am I going to be able to put Richard Burton? Should I put Richard Burton in my novel? Maybe I should put Burton in my novel. And then I started writing Richard Burton, and I just didn't. I was afraid he'd never leave. He was going to be such a minor character, and those characters come on, and it's funny. Rye is the protagonist of this novel, but he's not the hero. Elizabeth Gurley is very much the hero, a 19-year-old pregnant labor activist 10 years before she has the right to vote. And she's large in another way, but is also so assured of herself. Whereas these other characters who are conflicted, or who are, doing amoral or immoral things, it's so fascinating to try to write those, and then to get inside them, that empathy that you talked about. And I remember reading a review of a writer, I don't even remember who it was now, but I was like 15, just dreaming of being a novelist, and I used to read the blurbs and dream of people saying this about me. And he loves his characters more than God loves his creations. I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, wow, what an amazing thing for someone to say about a novelist.
yeah.
And it stuck with me all those years that that's how you treat your characters. And as a lifelong agnostic, I love that, because if you think about it for a minute, God doesn't treat his creations terribly well.
Right.
How much does he really love them? I felt, again, it was a level of intimacy, or a level of knowledge, to know the people and their weaknesses, and their that was the greatest thing that a novelist could do.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And I just felt like, even down to the fact that Early has as many names as a pre-Old Testament God. It was like you were trying to pin this guy down. You couldn't even get the right name for him. And I just felt like every time he was on, every time he was in front of me, I felt like Jess is wrestling with this guy. He's just wrestling with this guy. Yeah.
So funny. Yeah. And that was one of the drafts I actually had to do, was some of these other characters. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn had a larger role, as did Early Reston, and I thought some of these characters benefited from ambiguity in a way, from knowing less about them, and which is strange to say, but they. If I gave too much of them, I felt like it was harming the rest of the narrative a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's right what you say about Gurley, and but I think, for me, Gig was like the hero for me because of his sacrifice. Obviously Rye is a survivor. He's a hero of longevity, or of surviving, and Gig is a moral hero, really, even though he does some terrible things.
Without giving away the plot, there was one review that seemed to sort of say that maybe that I had a sort of political point I was making, that moderation was a better choice than revolution, and yet I don't think that's the case at all. one of the reasons that I telescoped the novel out to 1964 was I wanted to show Rye living in a world in which he benefited from what the revolutionaries had done. To me,
Right.
he was almost like the all of us. We're on, many of us spend our life on the sidelines, not leading the charge, but we then get the benefit of it. And
Right.
again, writing a labor novel, without being didactic or falling into the sort of proletariat trap of a whole bunch of people giving speeches. I really wanted this to be a big rollicking story. But I wanted that coda at the end, that these things, that labor created a middle class, and being the beneficiary of a middle class. I'm the first male in my direct line to graduate from high school. And that is because of the economic gains of my dad working in an aluminum plant, and so imperfect as it is, imperfect as every creation is, I felt like, that the gains of labor through the 1960s and 70s especially had been sort of forgotten in this, as we lurched into into another Gilded Age where billionaires make money during a pandemic, and more people fall into poverty, and and so it was, again, a way to kind of connect with the present moment by bringing Rye that far forward.
And I think also what you're saying, it was a way of honoring your family,
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I dedicated.
Yeah.
My dad and brother were both strong union guys.
Yeah.
So.
But one feels it when you read it.
Oh,
Feel that
great.
the honoring of the ancestors, really, which
thank you.
which gives it real weight and gives it real love and compassion. I think, that goes beyond anything specific.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. That's
thank you for writing this.
So sorry to pop right in, but I just wanted to give the audience a couple of questions for you two before we end our program. The question that's kind of
I have a question. I want to know what Jess is drinking.
Right. I hate to be on point, but it's Writer's Tears whiskey, Irish whiskey.
I've got tequila, but it's hidden.
I like it disguised in the coffee cup.
Right. How has the time of COVID and the restrictions involved changed, or have they changed your process or your subject matter as an author? And it's a question for both of you.
You want to go first, David?
Well, I haven't really gotten much writing done during COVID. I write when I have an idea. And unfortunately, I didn't really have. I mean, I've been kind of developing some television stuff, but not writing a novel since COVID hit. It would have been a wonderful opportunity to do so. But I did find that the novel that's coming out, Truly Like Lightning, was informed by an idea of getting away from the world. So that kind of presaged COVID for me, or at least my mind was in that space already. But yourself?
How long have you been on that idea?
How long did I what?
How long had you been working on that?
Oh, I had that idea probably 15 years ago. I mean, the germ of it. I mean, it's kind of like an amalgamation of three different ideas. That's why it's so long. And but I had the original idea probably 12 or 15 years ago.
You feel like you're a guy's friend, and you talk basketball, you chat about various things, and then all of a sudden he says, "Oh, can I send you my novel?" And it's like, "What? You finished another novel? Where we just did an event?" So that's you snuck it in there, I thought.
I did. I snuck it in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And yourself?
For me, initially, the life of someone living in a pandemic and the life of a novelist are just not that different. I've been social distancing since 1995. So I trudge out to my office and I write. I've found it really hard to write about this moment, partly because we're all just sort of waiting and staring and what to do with the anxiety the last 4 years, politically, let alone. And I was listening to a song David just dropped. He dropped a song too, "Laying on the Tracks," which has this lovely protest in it. And so, what to do with that, and then what to do with with this. It was interesting to be writing about 1909, right between the Spanish flu and the Russian flu. And a time when these pandemics were sort of, every 15, 20 years. So it just felt like, for all of us, it feels so out of time. But I don't know how I would write about it in fiction. It's to me, it's just trudge out to work, write things, and there are fewer places I can go eat. Book tour is in my office,
Right.
but it hasn't. I haven't suffered like most people, so I haven't felt like it's my story. And I felt like that over the summer with Black Lives Matter. I was so supportive of the protests. I felt certain things, but I also felt this isn't mine. This isn't something. No one wants to read a short story about a middle-aged, fairly successful white guy deciding to go to the protests.
I do.
Sometimes you just. I'll get right on. I'll say only to you, and then put away.
For me, I did I had the lockdown, the first lockdown here in the city in New York.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
so I was with my son.
Yeah.
My daughter was up in Providence, and so it was just me and him for like 4 months straight, 24/7, pretty much. And I got to say, it was beautiful on ways that I haven't quite digested yet. And I've thought, if I have anything COVID in me, story-wise, it's something like being imprisoned with your 17-year-old son. And
I could see.
There's something there. I don't know if I'll ever get to it, but there was something beautiful and very emotional in it for me. And so, who knows?
We had a similar experience in the beginning. Both our two younger kids came home, and it was so great for us. We were enjoying it so much. I remember once, though, looking in my son's bedroom, and he's a 20-year-old college sophomore, and he's, lying in his bed surrounded by like soccer ribbons and Harry Potter books. And I thought, this isn't where he wants to be. As much as we were enjoying it, I could tell it was really hard on him.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, obviously, so many people are suffering in so many different ways, but for younger people, for people that haven't left the home yet, I don't know what the world looks like to them. I know what it looks like to me, and it doesn't look good, and I don't know what it looks like to them. As you say, you're writing the 17-year-old. I look at my son, and you don't know how that person thinks. You're trying to write that person, but it's a leap. And so I try to make that leap too for my son, and I don't know that I'm successful at it.
Oh, I'd love to read that, though.
I haven't written it.
We'll get on. You'll just drop it one day. It'll drop
tomorrow.
So our second most voted question is, if either of you could write an ending for 2020, what would it be?
Oh, 2020, the year. Oh, I thought of the television show.
Wow. I mean, it'll start in 5 days. I mean, that would be a great start. For me, one of the really difficult things, I always thought the asshole ceiling in America was about 25%, and thinking it might be like 40 or 42%. If Biden wins and the Senate's win, Democrats win the Senate, I don't know that they can solve climate change and some of these existential problems. But I will at least feel like the asshole ceiling has come down a little bit. The people who either explain away, what's happened, or are in favor of it. So, I mean, it's really hard to look past next week. This is. It
is.
I've never felt an election like this.
Yeah, no, I think part of part of the dream is that getting Trump out will solve everything or something. And I don't know that it will. I mean, I think that's when we really have to look and say, okay, now where do we begin? You know, and
it's clearly not to solve everything, but the hope will be amazing.
Yeah, I just hope people don't get depressed when it's not like it just doesn't go back to normal or get wonderful right away because the ogre has been slain. You know, there's work to be done, a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and then after that, it's just pretty much the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl. I think that's the end.
Well, now that's crazy talk. That's crazy talk.
So one last question. Have you found yourselves returning to old favorites for reading? What has your reading life been during the pandemic?
Well, this is another thing I blame Trump for, is that I just read crappy political stuff all day long, and my brain has become somebody else's brain. I was never that interested in politics, but I get up and I have all these novels on my Kindle that I want to read, and I just go right to the Times, and then I get led somewhere else, and before you know it, it's 1 o'clock and I have no energy left. So, I mean, I'm hoping too that once Trump is gone, then I can kind of go get my mind back in some way. And I'm not saying I could do it myself, but I haven't had the discipline to not read everything every day that's not digested. It's just reports. There's no long view happening.
Yeah, same. The novel I've been reading is called 538.com, and I read it every day.
Right.
I went through stretches. My next book is a book of short stories, so I've been reading story collections, and I went back to Alice Munro and just blown away. And to be taken out of the world is such a thrill too. I mean, in another book I described looking at your phone as taking a digital hit, and we have to treat it like the addiction that it is sometimes. And that doom scrolling has been, I hope after the election we can all do what we do after New Year's and say, okay, and now I'm going on a diet. I'm going to do this and this and this. In the beginning of the pandemic, I felt like I was I was doing a much better job reading. I tend to not read the books that everyone's reading, and so it's like a crowded restaurant. If I see everybody reading the same thing, I kind of veer away. And so I had never read Wolf Hall, and I thought, since I'm writing a kind of...
That's great.
I need to read Wolf Hall. And then I finished it, and I thought, I can't go around asking anybody about it because they all read it. And so the loneliness of reading these great books after everyone really struck me when I thought, I can't talk to Wolf Hall about anybody.
Thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thank you so much, David. Thanks.
Jess, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. I can't wait to dig in and
There we go.
2 against 1.
Right.
Yes.
Oh wait, I wanted to ask one more question about basketball.
Yeah.
Do you think that you can tell a man's or woman's personality by watching them play basketball?
Oh yeah. Well, the first thing you can tell is if they wrestled in high school. Because a wrestler, certain kind of like a shot that looks like so horrific. Beyond that, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you can tell everything about a person by their jump shot. So.
Yeah, because I have actually walked away from a friendship or two after watching that.
Whew, I'm glad I didn't know that the first time we played.
No, I was like, oh no, I like this guy.
No, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.